All right, we're here just to discuss the Kawell copper alloy shoes. So let's start off with a little history. Copper is one of man's oldest metals, dating back from a long time ago, 10,000 years or so. It's used in the metal industry, as well as why we use it here in horseshoes is because the malleability, ductility, so in other words, it's going to be hammered out thin, malleability, thermal conductivity, although electrical I wouldn't say we'd be too concerned with horses, but definitely the thermal. And its resistance to corrosion. Its antimicrobial properties are being increasingly important in the prevention of infection. In the latest years, that's where the focus of copper and copper alloy shoes have come from. Now, I personally started using copper a long time ago, back in the 70s, and mostly I used it because a customer was getting married and wanted me to make special shoes on the horse's feet that just shined. And so I actually made 3/8 by 1 copper for the draft horses and nailed them on the day of the wedding, and it looked sexy. There was just copper and copper nails. I mean, it just looked great, you know. But there's a problem. It doesn't last very long, especially on a draft horse. So not exactly something you would want to leave. It did last for about 2 weeks, and it was barely hung on there. It boogered up the nail holes and stuff. So I didn't use copper in that sense of other than just making a sexy shoe. It's not suited for horseshoes because it wears out. It's great for forging. You can get you can put in pure copper and work it in the forge and get more temperature out of it. You can work it to a low temperature, so it's great. I use copper when teaching basic forging a lot of times with people because you get that length of time which people run out of when they're first learning forging. Now, the neat thing about copper, though, in recent years is it's alloyed with other metals to give it its strength and wearness and hardness, and so because copper shoe wouldn't work, we alloy it with other metals. Now, they're proprietary, so you can't tell you what exactly what's in them, but normally they're mixed with things like zinc and brass and stuff like that to get that. So here's forging some pure copper stock, and never comes the way you want it. Usually I end up with it as 3/4 inch or 1 inch round, and then you have to flatten it out and draw out and then make your shoe and stuff like that. So it's sort of a pain. So copper alloy shoes are obviously much better. They've been used for thousands of years at killing bacteria before research was ever done. A lot of old drinking vats have copper linings in them in order to kill bacteria. They realized that it killed bacteria back then, but there was obviously no research on it. The U.S. EPA got into doing research through all the major universities and started looking at the copper alloys, and they realized that it's the only metal whose properties have been certified. So if you got a copper alloy shoe, it's certified. It can be certified by the EPA as working, and it will kill 98% of bacteria within 2 hours on contact. They call this touch surface contact. That's why a lot of the hospitals are using copper and copper alloys on touch surface stuff. So anything that they want bacteria to kill on, so their trays will be copper lined, toilet seats, IV bag holders, things like that, door handles, where they want strep bacteria killed, especially since a lot of people have strep issues in the hospital. Now, in order for any copper company, but we're talking about copper alloy horseshoes, to make claims about killing bacteria, they have to be tested and approved by the EPA. So they send that into the US EPA to be tested, and they undergo the approval process. And if they pass, the test it basically confirms the amount of copper and its purity in the product, and then they're given a pass-fail, basically, and then they're classified. To date, I'm only aware of one horseshoe company, Kawell, that's EPA approved. That horseshoes that a lot of people got, the hind shoe pattern that were being passed out last year, is not an EPA-approved company, and its copper content was very low, and it also had aluminum and other things in it when tested, and that's why a lot of people had complaints with it snapping and breaking and all sorts of things. So it really has to be tested and tested well. So they can make claims that it kills 99% of bacteria on contact because the EPA now allows them to do that. They're registered, and I'll show you that here in a second. And and I've personally seen it do that. So here's the registration categories. There's 6 groups in the copper CDA, the Copper Development Agency, and the percent of copper is determined, and that determines your EPA number. So Kawell's got an 82012-3, which means it's in the 3rd group of copper, which means it has 78 to 87% of copper, and mostly Kawell runs around 84 to 88, so they have a higher copper content. And then they get a patent number, and so that is their registration number, and so that can go on their box, and they can make claims that it kills 99% of bacteria. And here's the other claims that they can actually post on their box if they wanted to, is it kills the most severe of bacteria on contact. All right. So this is what some of the shoe patterns. They don't have a lot of patterns. Front hinds, clipped, unclipped, toe clipped, side clip. Basically a wide web shoe. So I'll pass that around on this side. I got one for the other side. So you can just put your hands on. Now, when you handing a shoe to the owner, if you feel the shoe, a lot of people expect it to be light like aluminum. It's not. Copper is actually, when it's alloyed with brasses and stuff, is slightly heavier than steel. It's only a few ounces. When we compared to all the sizes to each other, we had only a difference of 2 to 4 ounce difference. So it's going to be a few ounces heavier than steel. So you have to take that consideration. And again, it's due to the other alloys that are mixed in with it. Obviously, they're recyclable at a higher amount, but I don't recycle them too much because I actually use every piece of that shoe. When I'm done with them, I'll take that shoe and turn 3 frog plates out of a horseshoe because I'll use these, braze weld them into a shoe. They shape cold or hot. They're just like steel. You can close them up a little. I don't do cold shoeing, but you can cold shoe them. There's a little bit more spring to it than steel. They can handle about 1,100 degrees, and I determined that through Tempest sticks when we were testing. The company uses 900 degrees is what you should bring them up to. We found the temperature excellent for shaping and drawing out clips. You can do anything you do on steel with the copper alloy. Here's the Tempe sticks I use. I don't use wood handles or newspapers. We actually use Tempe sticks to determine temperature differences. And we can get them pretty hot and work them. So that's the shoe worked up to 1,100 degrees. And that shoe went on a horse, so it held up on the horse. And draw out clips with them without a problem. Here's the difference between a shoe that comes out of the box on the right and one that you've heated in the forge. Obviously, it changes the properties, not the properties, but the color. So you can see that it's going to be black a little bit. For the people that are interested, it does produce a force transmission, lesser magnitude than steel horseshoes. It's a reduction of about 10 or 8.5%, 8.5%. So if you want to reduce concussion and induction, copper alloy horseshoes can do that. They seem to wear someplace between aluminum and steel horseshoes, depending on your horse. I have found most of the times I'm nailing these on first time, and then I'll get 2 to 3 resets out of them. So they're matching my steel more than they match my aluminum. Now, occasionally I'll have a heavy horse with that will wear a steel shoe out. They're going to wear an aluminum shoe out too, or excuse me, a copper alloy shoe. So here's a shoe that was put on, and then 6 weeks later, at time of reset, taking pictures so through the course of all the horses that we tested with these shoes to determine how the shoes held up. And so you can see it's marked up by the environment. There's very little toe wear. Pulled the shoe off. We redid it. We can pack them underneath it, and that doesn't affect the effects of the copper alloy. There's the toe wear after 13 weeks of shoe, just to give you an idea. It's like toe is on the bottom, just so you know, hoof surface up. So they don't excessively wear. They can be brazed welded, or welded depending on which system that you want to do. Steel can also be brazed into them. So a lot of times if I have an animal, now remember, the copper alloy is working because it's in contact with a foot, I'd be putting them on for seedy toe areas or seedy issues and things like that. I'll also braze in a frog plate into them. So if I have an animal that has thrush or an atrophied frog, I'll braze in copper alloy into the shoes. So the frog in contact with that is now having the bacteria killed. And then there's a leaching process where it leaches down on the frog, the copper salts. You guys have probably seen that on old houses where they have copper edge and ridge plates. And the reason why they do that is the environment, the acid rain and hits the copper, leaches down the roof, and it's also on the bottom, and it keeps moss from growing or reduces moss on your foot, so it leaches on over into that. There's a copper shoe also where you can braze and braze weld in copper. You can treat this like steel. So in other words, it doesn't matter what if you braze weld it. If you want to weld, you can weld. So either or. And then here's that shoe that's being passed around. It's a St. Croix shoe with the copper in it. Now these are the studies. Basically, these are the most severe of pathogens, and these are all the things tested that show it kills the most severe pathogens out there. So, it's pretty potent, more potent than what we thought. And the hoof surface, now I will warn you, some things are going to look funky when you walk up to the shoe. First, you're going to notice one thing, which I'll talk about second here, but you're going to first notice that the bottom of the shoe is going to be tarnished a little bit. And that is the environment, urine, wet, and it's getting on the shoe, and it's producing copper salts. And that's what copper alloy does. So that shoe doesn't necessarily have to lay exactly where you want the bacteria killed. It's going to leach throughout the entire foot, and it leaches deep into the sole. The second way it's killed is through galvanic reaction with the steel nails. You would not, people often ask, don't you put a copper nail in? No, most of the copper nails are copper plated. They don't have enough copper content in them, so they don't work. It's a steel nail that you actually want in a copper alloy shoe. Just like you get a reaction when you put a steel nail into an aluminum shoe, you know that pitting that occurs, that flaky pitting, that's aluminum oxide that's being produced from steel touching aluminum. Now, it's not necessarily good in some essence as far as, if it's your truck and you got aluminum body on it and your steel's touching your aluminum, your entire body's going to crumble eventually. But on a horseshoe, it doesn't matter. And the aluminum oxide that's produced, we haven't shown that creates any issues. Matter of fact, the base of most pit sticks is aluminum oxide, so we don't know what it does. Well, in copper, they've tested the reaction, and when steel touches copper or copper alloy, it produces copper salts. So that leaches onto the foot and leaches all around. So that's a second way that bacteria and fungi are killed in the foot. So this was an animal that had a positive pressure heart bar shoe on. We backed off the pressure, but what I'm going to end up doing is putting a copper alloy shoe on because, through this process it's got some issues, it's got some seedy areas and stuff. So we put a lot of our copper alloy shoes on horses like that, especially since I'm going to put a shoe over the area to protect that foot, and I'm going to cover up that white line area where it's got some seedy issues. And yeah, I could pare it out and I could pack it with stuff. How long does that stuff last? Never is there when I go back. I could ask the owner to put stuff underneath the shoe. Owner compliance is somewhat of an issue sometimes. So it's a lot easier to put the copper alloy shoe on. So here's that horse. Again, it was a foundered horse, it was a sinker, so we're still working on the toe and stuff. And come back, and this is the galvanic reaction and the leaching from the shoe. Now, the animal's got some other issues, some contractures and stuff, but this sole is being trimmed, and look how deep into the sole this goes. So it's not just surface and runs over the surface, it's deep into the exterior sole. So it stays in there for a little bit of time. So you're going to see your feet look black. And when you put it on the frog, it'll leach down in the commissures and be black and up on the bars, so you know. And it'll be deep in there, so you'll see it. So even on a trimmed foot, it's deep into the sole. So it's killing that bacteria. So personally, I find any horse with bacterial fungal issues, sole issues, I'll put on the copper alloy shoe if I'm definitely going to have owner problems, habitual seedy toes. Canker cases, often I put copper alloy shoes on all my canker cases in order to help with that. I mean, we use several different things on canker after we've done a debridement, which is the number one thing. Sometimes we'll freeze. But then after that, we're going to tend to put on like copper sulfate, something like that, or sometimes some crushed up methodiazole or kind of thing. But copper sulfate is a problem. Now, anyone here from California? When you buy copper sulfate, new label on the bag, it says copper sulfate causes cancer in California. So don't use it in California because you'll get cancer apparently. What it is copper sulfate is when you buy bagged and pure, is very toxic. That's why it kills a lot of canker. You got to wear gauntlets and stuff like that. If you don't, it's like Formin and formaldehyde-based products. So owner compliance issues is where it's greatly used when you know the owner's not going to pick out the feet and they're just going to throw the animal back out into the environment. I like them because I've been highly impressed with their strength. Wear resistance I've been very impressed with. I thought these things were going to wear out very, very quickly, just like pure copper, but they didn't. Antimicrobial properties have all been researched and done, so I was very impressed with that.